Oh, it's Beeforge. Whoa, hey everyone. Just thought I'd pop this thing on nice and early. Let me know if you can't hear me or, Let me know if you can't hear me or if things are too loud. Senali's next door and they're pumping music, and then we're gonna go in there in a second to show some people some stuff. I've worn a turtleneck every day this week except one because I ran out of turtlenecks. I hope that's acceptable, Ben. So pretty much we've got a lot of questions from the blog, which was great, lots of upvotes, a few questions that I'm glad didn't get upvoted, but pretty much most of the top questions are things that we've been seeing a lot of, so I'm just going to start going through them, giving my 2 cents. If any of you have any extra questions, just sling a comment in there and then I'll try and add some more detail or, answer it in a different way if it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go from 10 back through to number 1, starting with Chris Sirico asks, should I pull longer shots for milk? So obviously there's the compromise between extraction and strength, but since strength goes out the window, strength goes out the window with milk, wouldn't it make sense to extract a little bit more from the coffee? So you have 2 options when you're making a milky drink. You can either pull a longer shot, or you can pull a shorter shot, or you can just pull a normal shot. Longer shots are going to dilute the espresso. So firstly, you're going to start off with a weaker espresso, but it's also going to improve the extraction of that espresso. So it's going to be weaker. It's probably also going to be a bit sweeter and a little bit more balanced. So in that milky drink, then perceived balance is going to go up because the drink is a little bit softer, it's a little bit more gentle. Mouthfeel goes down, obviously, because there's a lot less total dissolved solids in there. I sometimes prefer this as an option compared to the other one. I'm not a big fan of pulling shorter shots for milk. That said, I usually prefer shots around 9% TDS for milk drinks, so usually they would be slightly shorter. But shorter shots generally move towards under extraction. I mean, with espresso, most people are already threading treading on that line between under extraction and good extraction, and if you start to pull a shorter shot, then it's very, very likely that you're going to start under extracting that espresso. And although you do get more richness, you're not going to get more sweetness. It's going to taste kind of gluey. Gluey is a word I always use for under extracted milky drinks. And yes, richness, but no on balance and no on efficiency as well. It's going to cost you a lot more to make that same milky beverage. That said, if your milk is fatty, you can get away with pulling a longer espresso and ending up with a similar concentration because the fat in that drink is helping it not be diluted too much. Next up was from Durya. What do you think about pressure profiling? Do you use or recommend a pressure profile, or do you stick with the old 9-bar standard? I like to stick with just a pressure because I don't think I'm good enough at espresso to be able to figure out what the hell's going on if I do a pressure profile. So like whether it's 9-bar, 6-bar, 5-bar, 4-bar, I like to just ramp up to that pressure and then keep it there. It's so confusing when you start to add different areas of pressure profiling in there. And then depending on your grinder and your machine, you'll want to be somewhere between, say, if it's a really fast flow rate and you're using like an EK43, I'd be all the way down at 4 bars because that's going to reduce the flow rate. If you're on a machine with a lot of restrictors and it's a very slow machine and you're using a regular traditional espresso grinder, then I'd be at 9 bar. So really that's what pressure is catering for. It's helping you adjust that flow rate and make sure everything is easier and more conducive to the recipe that you're trying to make. So don't think of pressure as something that's magical and there's a magic spot. It's more about manipulating flow rate. The bridge asked, give us the final answer, what is a flat white? I'm not qualified to tell you what a flat white is, but Alex Bernson, my partner in crime on this blog, wrote a massive piece and interviewed thousands of people online about what a flat white actually is. So if you head to Sprudge and type in flat white explained, there's going to be a lot of detail on what that is. That said, at Sensory Lab in St. Ali, we split our espresso shots, so we have a 20 to 21 gram dose, usually 19 to 21 gram dose, and we're making 9% espresso from that, weighing, if like the double espresso would weigh between 40 and 45 grams. So we split that into two 150 ml ceramic cups, and then we would steam the milk pretty close to a latte. So we're not aiming to make it flat white. It's just a milky drink that's good, and that's how we make flat whites. It's nice and balanced. Mike Shevnin asked, why do we need a bloom stage when brewing a pour over? When I think about it in terms of evenness, it does make sense. If you start brewing without blooming, all coffee grounds will be saturated with water. So blooming's interesting, and everyone talks about it, and then someone will be like, oh, well, you need to bloom to initiate the extraction and wet the coffee grounds to prepare them for extraction. Espresso doesn't have pre-infusion, and total immersion brews like plungers and siphons and AeroPresses, they don't have pre-infusion either, and they taste great. So pre-infusion isn't a magic phase that's doing anything really cool. All it's really doing for pour overs is increasing your total brew time. So if you poured in all of your brew water straight away, your pour over would probably be a minute and a half. But if you've got a 30 to 45 second bloom, you're extending your brew time by that amount of time and probably getting much more extraction. So don't think of blooming as a magical phase that's going to change the coffee. Just think of it as extending or reducing your total brew time and giving you a chance to fully saturate the grinds by stirring them. Now, Nicholas Rodriguez asked your thoughts on the dynamic of extraction in drip coffee versus immersion. Really, there's two big differences. One is temperature, and the other is how the extraction of the solubles moves out into the water. So in a total immersion brew, the temperature is always going down because you added your hot water at the start, and then it's up to the brewer to maintain that temperature. So you've got a declining temperature gradient. And with a pour over, depending on what you're doing with your kettle, the kettle's probably keeping the water pretty hot or hotter than the brew. As you add more water in various stages, it's going to be, that temperature is going to be constantly declining, but also slightly increasing every now and again. This changes, I think that this changes mostly the flavor that you're getting at the end of the extraction. Because it's much hotter when the coffee grounds are quite depleted of flavor. So it is possible, I think, to most people tend to steer towards under extraction because of that in total immersion, and I think some people would probably steer towards over extraction in pour overs. What's the best way to keep water temp constant? Just keep the kettle on an induction cooktop, or in terms of pour over, kettle on an induction cooktop and keep it boiling, and then constantly add the boiling water. In terms of total immersion brews, you need an insulated brewer with a lid. And a thermos will keep a brew or coffee pretty stable for a while, but you're only going to keep so many degrees per minute, and if a brew is only a couple minutes long, it's not going to decline that much if you've got an insulated brewer with a lid. The other difference is osmosis. Obviously, towards the end of the brew with a pour over, the water in and surrounding the grinds is pretty weak, so it's already, most of the coffee flavor has been extracted and moved down into the brew. So at the end of the brew, that osmosis is probably much more aggressive, so it's pulling the coffee flavor out because the water that's surrounding the grinds is fresh. And then in a total immersion brew, all of the coffee has been sitting with all of the brew the whole time. So towards the end there, you're probably going to slow down a lot more towards the end. Maybe that's going to give you a larger window or more margin of error to stop the brew with total immersion. Or with pour over, maybe it's going to be a little bit more finicky with when you need to finish it, but it's not going to be massive. As long as you adjust your recipe, it's going to be fine. Maxwell and also Christopher, the two authors of that book, it's going to be the best book on water. It's going to be a tome. I would recommend buying it without hesitation. I haven't read it, but I've talked to both those guys, and there's no one on the planet more knowledgeable about coffee and water. So get the book. it will make your life easier, I have no doubt. So Siddiq Merchant managed to squeeze in 3 questions into one question, so I'm going to answer them probably 1/3 as well for each. So number 1 was pre-infusion time dynamics. I don't really know what this question is about, but longer pre-infusions will make your shot time longer. If you pre-infuse for a longer time, your shot will run faster. Apart from that, the time dynamics, I don't really have too much to add. Brew temperature dynamics, this is for espresso, by the way. Too hot is going to be dry, too cold is going to be sour. That's my general rule. If you're constantly finding that it's one of those problems, change the temperature and see if you can adjust it. The way that I like to think about temperature for espresso is as cast your mind back to high school chemistry and when you did equilibrium equations, where you mix one thing that weighs this much and has this thermal mass with this thing that weighs this much and has this much thermal mass, mix them together in a frictionless vacuum, and what is the resulting temperature. So it's going to be impossible for us to figure out what the actual gradient of temperature is in an espresso machine, but you can pretty easily figure out what the average is. And once you have a calculation like that and you figured out what the average is, you'll notice that having an espresso machine at a certain temperature is cool, that's nice, but really focusing on the grind temperature as well is going to make things a lot more controlled. A small change in grind temperature is also going to change your average brew temperature. So you've got to think about that too. And then lastly, he asked what the ideal espresso to milk ratios for different size cups are and what style of espresso for each one. That's a bit of a silly question because I think for each espresso and milk type, there's only one ratio between espresso and milk that's good. You don't change your espresso recipe for every cup size. It's just a really good espresso at a certain ratio with milk. So to answer that question, the ratio that I really like at the moment, and it's one that we serve in all of our cafes, is if you're going by weight, 1 part espresso at 9% TDS, roughly, so maybe 8 to 10% TDS, and then 4 to 5 parts milk. And that would be our regular cappuccino or flat white that we serve in the cafes. And if you want to adjust that for different cup sizes, adjust it up and down. Use more espresso or less espresso. Nicholas Fink asked, I usually buy a 12-ounce bag of coffee the day after its roast date and use it within 2 weeks. Do you have any general suggestions for changing variables from day 2 to day 13 to create the best pour over possible? I want it to taste like day 3 to 6 all the time. So after it's roasted, coffee will become more soluble, so it's going to be easier to extract it as it gets older. We've noticed this with all of our coffees for the last while. They slowly become easier to extract, whether that's because there's less CO2 getting in the way of extraction or if something else is happening, I'm not quite sure. So I would adjust my recipes to extract slightly less as the coffee gets older to try and keep it the same, very slightly less. Day to day it would be almost imperceptible. And then of course packaging is probably the most crucial thing there because that's what's really changing. The coffee is staling over those days. I would recommend if you're going to be slower brew times, at the start and then quicken them or change your grind as well. At the start I would freeze all of your coffee. I'd portion it out into your brews into clip-lock bags or vacuum bags if you have them as soon as the coffee arrives, and then freeze them. Chuck them in the freezer, and then it's going to be much less likely that coffee is going to stale over that time. Pull it out of the freezer, and I would even recommend grinding it while they're still frozen because you're going to get a much better particle distribution from frozen coffee beans. Now, the next question is from RM, and he asked a whole lot of questions about batch brew. So I'm just going to give a quick couple of tips about how to get the best batch brew. He also said that some of them taste bad. Fedco or batch brewers will only do what you tell them to do. It's like someone using a computer and telling you that it's not doing what they want it to do. That's their fault, not the computer's fault. It's no better or worse than a manual brew, but it is much more consistent once you've dialed everything in. what I would do is, without any coffee or without the basket, dispense the amount of water for a brew cycle and weigh it, and do that 5 times, and measure the weight of those dispensers of water, and then you're going to get an average for that brewer. And then I would design my recipe to that average. So don't look at what the screen says, don't think that you're getting a certain volume of water. Know what the volume of water is that you're getting out of the brewer and what the average is, and then put your dose for your recipe right in the middle. And Tyson, yes, frozen coffee does shatter more, which creates a much more even particle size, because you're always going to have fines, so freezing the beans brings the larger particles down closer to the smaller ones, creating more evenness. Once it's dialed in, you don't need to TDS it every single time. Coffee won't get softer as it gets older. It's still the same brittleness and hardness, unless it gets soggy. Don't worry about TDSing your brew every single time. Once you've got that average and you know what the maximum and minimum is, and you've got your whatever your basket is, dude. If your basket's 19, use 19. And then once you've got that range for your batch brew, just you know that it's there. You know that the grinder hasn't changed. You know the coffee hasn't changed. So I think 53 more baskets are silly, and I have no objective justification for that except my opinion. After you brew the batch brew, you need to stir it really, really vigorously to make sure that it hasn't stratified. And then you should have finished the pot, or you should have either thrown it out or finished it and served it all before you need to worry about stirring it again. So 40 minutes should be fine. And finally, for batch brew, people do not focus on this enough, and it's really, really annoying, and you can taste it from a mile away. People need to clean the pots that the coffee's sitting in much, much more thoroughly. So the only way that I've found that sufficiently cleans a press pot or an insulating pot is to fill it with hot water and espresso cleaning powder, and then actually stick the pot onto the steam arm of your espresso machine and boil it with the steam arm. And then you need to soak it for a little while as well. So without that 100 degrees of energy helping the espresso powder, you're never going to clean the inside of the pot. Rinsing doesn't work, hot water doesn't work, even just putting espresso machine cleaner and hot water in doesn't work. You have to steam it and bring it up to 100 degrees. If you don't do that, it's going to taste like stewy, weird, leafy vegetables and all kinds of crap stuff. Cleaning espresso pot, cleaning the pots. Yeah, boiling water is the best. I use boiling water whenever possible for all brewers. You can't burn coffee with boiling water. The coffee was in the coffee roaster at 220 degrees Celsius. 100 degree water is like a warm bath. Team boil. Callum von Blackensee asked pre-infusion and how would it fit into an espresso recipe? So that's similar to the other question. So pre-infusion is going to give you less channeling, a little bit less channeling if your distribution isn't great. Scott Rao in his book says that it provides more adhesion. I think he means to the basket, so it's kind of like it's going to increase the size of the grinds and fluff them out and fill up that basket really well. So pre-infusion doesn't add sweetness or improve acidity or increase extraction or anything, but what it does do is it makes your worst shot a little bit better because it decreases the chance that you're going to get channels. So your shot is going to be longer in time because you've pushed less water through it over a longer period of time. So if you want to hit a certain yield, then it's going to require a longer shot time to get there. That said, it's also going to run faster because you've pushed water in. It's all, sitting there in a nice sort of, a slurry would be a nice word for it rather than a puck. And then it's going to make your shot run faster as well. So you need to take those two things into account when you're using pre-infusion. Personally, like a couple seconds, and then ramp up to whatever bar you're using, and you should be good. And then finally, Anders Torp got the top-rated question with, could you show your whole tapping distribution and tamping procedure? Yes. I'm at St. Ali at the moment, or I'm next door to St. Ali. And we're going to go in and see what the girls are doing during service. So you'll actually be able to see how fast it is and how efficient it is. So it's a bit noisy in there, and St. Ali is currently undergoing renovations. So I apologise that the bar isn't as pretty as it could be. And it's got a lot of hoarding behind it as we build the toilets. But you'll get the idea and you'll be able to see what the distribution is. It's really noisy in there, so I'm kind of probably going to say goodbye now. You might not be able to hear me in there. We'll just watch the girls for a little while, see what they're doing, how they're distributing. Excursion time. But I'll keep trying to answer questions as I'm in there. So let's rock and roll. This is the new wine bar Smalls next to Ali, by the way. It's really pretty. They have delicious wine. You should come here. And that's the pass through to the kitchen. This is Jess.
Hello.
And Lara. Babes on bar. And Lara's gonna show us some distribution.
Actually, Jess is going to show you.
Oh, you're
Because
subbing
she's
off.
the biggest babe ever. Set me up.
All right, so the aim with the distribution method that we're using is to be as fast as possible while getting the best distribution possible. Obviously, that's pretty simple. So we've got 3 grinders on here. We've got Robo, we've got the Malkonig Peak, and then we've got the EK. So we're just going to rock with the Robo at the moment, I guess. What do you need to make?
I need to make...
Weigh some things.
Soy flat white.
A soy flat white, lovely. Classic St. Ali beverage. So a couple taps on the forks means that the grinds aren't going to be slipping over the top. Rock and roll. And then just a couple of taps. You notice that there weren't too many taps. We didn't go crazy. We're not trying to create a putting green. I'm here, Kirill. All right. So let's watch this again, except full speed as Jess, not like, warp speed, maybe just full speed. So a couple taps on the forks, weigh it on the scales, make sure it's good. Taps, boom, that was it. You don't need to spend a lot of time. If you are tapping on the forks, and you've got a really nice technique down, it's not going to take you very long to distribute. One thing to take note is the first few times that you actually do start hitting a portafilter, it's going to be really, really uncoordinated, and coffee's going to fly everywhere because you'll tap the handle one way and the coffee will go the other way. But be patient, and you're going to develop some muscle memory to be able to distribute really, really quickly and efficiently at the same time. So that's it for all of the questions. Thanks for sending them all in, and we're probably going to be doing more of these in the future as we have more fun questions, and they're going to be more spontaneous. So keep an eye out. Ben Morrow for Coffee Masters New York. And peace out. Have a great day, guys.